Welcome to this week's episode of Movie Magpies, where we'll be discussing The Big Sick.
See, that was easy.
Was it? Yeah. I don't know.
Hey everybody, I'm Will, and today with me is my co-host Monique.
Hi. Before we start talking about the movie today, we just wanted to give you a bit of a summary on what the movie The Big Sick is about. So this movie is available on Netflix, and the Netflix synopsis is: sparks fly between a comedian and a grad student, but his Muslim's family expectations destroy their romance. When she falls ill, he must take a stand. And that's the synopsis. I think it's a really interesting movie. What do you reckon, Will?
Yeah, you introduced me to this movie, and first time we watched it, I think I fell asleep halfway through.
Which is so incredibly upsetting to me.
Yeah, and then second time, yeah, I definitely understand why it is so good, and I really liked it.
With this one, obviously, if you didn't grasp from the summary, there is a little bit of warning for severe illness, and there are a lot of discussions around like hospitals and sickness. So just be warned. I know personally, coming from a medical family, watching this was a little intense at times. So I just want to give that as a bit of a warning.
Yeah, I do find it really interesting that the synopsis is more like focused around the main character Kumal's family, because for me definitely that was what it was like in terms of a followable or readable story. That was the one thing that stuck with me consistently.
Yeah, for me, there's kind of the two sides of the story, which obviously is his family and his relationship with the grad student whose name is Emily.
Yeah, Emily. And I also find it interesting that like a big part of the movie is not really his relationship with her, but his relationship with his own family and also her family.
Yeah, it's a really nice look into sort of expectation versus inner self, I suppose would be the word that I would choose. And it really, for me, this is just like one of those stories where, yeah, it's very slice of life. It's got the sort of like romance to it, but the stakes don't have to be high for the story to be fulfilling. Like,
Yeah.
they don't have to be life or death or the whole world's gonna get destroyed or da. Like, they can be small and personal and still be so fulfilling and relatable and like take you through a journey. So
Yeah, and what I love is that there is no like big bad villain. There's no character in this movie we're gonna keep coming back to about this film, is that it's very real.
yeah, very real, very relatable, I
Yeah.
suppose, would be the word that I think you and I kept using, was relatable. There was a little bit there where we're writing notes, and I'm just messaging Will, and I'm like, I'm sad.
Our group
I don't want to watch this anymore. Not by
Yeah.
myself.
For all you viewers at home, our group OneNote just became just a chat room for a little bit while we talked about our feelings, which is a testament to this film because it made us do that.
Yeah, we're both taking notes in tandem. Obviously, Will and I live a bit far away from each other at the moment,
Yes.
and of course, stay at home, stay safe. So we use our OneNote to sort of write our notes, and then yesterday we just so happened to watch the film at the same time. So
Yeah.
that was a very interesting experience, watching it together, but not really.
It really did work out well for us.
Yeah, hey. And then we ended up at one point we weren't writing notes, we were just making like sad faces at each other.
Well, here's the one thing. The one thing that like about this movie, there's very little for me to criticize, and with all my years of study and learning in film, there's of course a great deal that I can talk about, but the cinematography it suits its purpose. The music is fine and it fits fits everything in the film. But the only thing that actually stands out like solidly about this film is its story. There's no
Yeah.
there's no life-changing cinematography or camera direction.
And it's really nice to see a film where they're focusing on what shot conveys the plot and like what shot helps you move the story along and understand the story,
Yeah.
rather than like which shot is the prettiest. It's entirely different to other movies that you see where like every second shot is like a beautiful picture, and there's that you should be able to pause the movie at any given time and have like a beautiful still.
Yeah.
This movie doesn't really do that, but it makes it to me feel more like a home movie. It really, really suits the dynamic and the storyline
Yeah.
of that sort of real, grounded world
Yeah.
slice of life.
Well, the thing I
Movie.
was going to say is that none of the frames are designed to be beautiful or striking visually. They're designed to look as real as possible. And it's
Yeah.
the only criticism I have with the camera direction or anything like that is that like all of the filmmaking and all the cinematography is done to make it look real, but at points because it's all handheld.
Yeah, I noticed that. There's a bit of sort of shaky camera work.
Yeah, that can almost be not jarring. It can be quite unnerving at points. You know, in points where there's high tension, you have like this little bit of camera wobble, and you just feel like you're there in this situation, standing in the corner, watching it
Like if you've
happen.
ever, if you're somebody who's ever experienced like bouts of anxiety or like anxiety attacks, sometimes it does feel like you're standing there and like the world is shaking. So it
Yeah,
really does pull you into the moment in those spots. And then even in the areas that aren't supposed to be tense with the little sort of handheld like camera movement that
yeah,
you get. I don't know, it just makes it feel homey to me. I just feel like,
that's
oh,
fair
this is a
enough.
cute little family
Yeah.
video. Like,
Because the one thing I'd always learned in, camera operation is if you do handheld in films, it's usually meant to convey discomfort in a situation. It's usually used in high, points of high tension. So I'm not saying that they've done this wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting that it was used this way because ultimately there are definitely shots that could have been done on a tripod, and it would have probably had the same effect. But the fact that they went with just purely handheld for the whole thing does really build its immersion, and you get used to it after, a good 5 minutes.
I feel like if they didn't do it, the places where they couldn't or didn't use a tripod and you
Yeah,
did have that handheld effect, it would have felt either A, out of place, or you would have gotten more of that sort of unnerving feeling. I feel like because it went the whole way through, it just helped make everything feel cohesive almost.
yeah. Well, that was what I was going to say next, and that the fact that they do it for the entire film just means that if that you're never going to get that jarring change of camera position or movement. So
Mm.
I think in a sense it uses that to its benefit, where it's always handheld, so you get used to the fact that the camera is always kind of shifting and wobbling just a little bit.
Uh-huh. I think my only other sort of remark that I'd noted with the camera work was this is one of those films where even though they're in like a quote unquote dark room, you can still really clearly see the characters' faces. And
Yeah.
I really love that. Thank you. That's one of my biggest gripes when you move into like a movie and they're like, oh, we're in a dark cave. And you're like, cool, I can't see shit. Like,
Yeah, the lighting is purposeful, and I personally love that. There's a scene very early on where Kumal drives Emily back to her place, and
mm,
both characters are perfectly lit, which probably means that someone had like rigged a light to the outside of the car into the back seat of the car so that Emily's face could be lit, and it's not necessarily realistic because she's always perfectly lit. Her face is always perfectly lit in the scene,
I didn't
but
even
it's
think about
purposeful,
that.
which is
How would
amazing.
people film in a car? Like filming driving scenes. Do you either have to film them like one little bit at a time? Are you not actually driving? Like,
Well, here's the thing. I actually know how to do that because I've been trained in interior car rigging. Well, it depends on which shot. That kind of shot, you just kind of put the camera on the dashboard and ideally strap it down so it doesn't fly off if you hit the brakes. But yeah, it's not incredibly difficult to rig a camera inside a car.
hmm,
There are certain ways to do it outside of the car, but those usually are for exterior car shots through the window, things like that.
interesting.
But
I just
yeah,
like thinking safety wise, like there's got to be some level of like driving distraction
oh
with
yeah, there's
being
always
filmed in a
risk,
car.
but you're making a film, and I think one of the biggest rules is that you usually don't drive too fast. One of the you
Yeah,
can never
yeah.
reach beyond a certain speed limit. In Australia, that's 50 kilometers an hour. You can never drive faster than that with a camera in the car. A
Oh,
camera rigged in the car. Yeah, as I said, I'm trained in this sort of thing. I have rigged a cinema camera into the interior of an SUV before, and we used like certain straps that I won't name, but they broke and the camera almost collapsed inside the car. So ultimately, safety is a huge precaution. I'm sorry, we're getting a little sidetracked, but if you decide to rig a camera inside the back seat of a car, you usually can only have one attendee in the back seat to make sure that the camera is on and working and not falling over. But yeah, it's possible. It's always, possible to rig inside a car. There are just safety requirements that come with it.
Fair enough. I suppose we should get back a little bit
Let's
back on
get back
topic.
to the movie.
All of the scenes are very well lit, even the car scenes, which is very interesting because filming in a car is easy but hard at the same time, as we've just discussed.
Well, it's easy, but that comes with a modicum of risk. So it's really nice in this film that the lighting specifically is just done with so much purpose.
Yeah.
As opposed to style.
Even like the shots, like you're not always, I feel like in some movies, especially romance movies, you're always looking at like one of the romantic interests, like like either one half of the couple, basically. You're always looking at them or their face. I feel like they don't really do that as much in this movie. I feel like they more focus on the situation as a whole rather than just the character, which is super cool.
Yeah, and I like how they kind of make an approach to, if we've got like, in some of the comedy scenes, we've got like 4 or 5 people in this scene. How do we light this realistically enough so that it's not going to take people out of it, but we can still see everyone?
And the characters themselves are super interesting because obviously several of the characters in this movie are actual comedians. So name-wise and everything, they're using that sort of structure. And the first time I watched it, it kind of pulled me out of the movie a little bit, but second and third time watching it, it didn't bother me.
Yeah, no, it never really bothered me, but I think that's probably because I'm not quite as into Bo Burnham as...
Yeah, no, I will admit I saw Bo Burnham and was like the meme of Leonardo DiCaprio pointing. I was like, it's Bo, like...
Yeah, no, I've never really seen Bo Burnham in anything, so it didn't take it out too much for me. But yeah, I can definitely see that because, spoilers, this is based on a true story. And I'm using that spoiler sarcastically.
Yeah.
Before we started the podcast, I looked up just the Big Sick Wikipedia and various like reviews and stuff, and there were like 4 or 5 questions. Is the Big Sick based on a real story? And I'm just like, God, they tell you that.
Yeah, at the very end of the movie, like you get the this is based on a true story, and you get like pictures of the actual people, and it's very cute, which I suppose is why it's so realistic as well, is because
it's based on a true
real
story.
Yeah.
And that ultimately makes sense why everything is done with such purpose as opposed to style, because they wanted to present a real story in a realistic way. And so even in situations of like family tension, it feels like real because it probably is based on a real event or a real situation within Kumail's family, which was actually quite tense. So it definitely draws from it.
Can I say, just every single time he's at like a dinner with his family and there's like a silence, or his mother brings someone in to the table, I just palpably like felt that in my chest. Like this movie does a really good job of conveying awkward, uncomfortable, tense situations, sort of to the point where the secondhand embarrassment started getting pretty real at some points.
Yeah, no, I definitely felt that as well. All the family scenes, when the family is as a collective, it's incredibly awkward, and you definitely feel this sense of discomfort just throughout it because you're looking at it through the main character's eyes and through his lens, and it's all very uncomfortable because the mother is trying to set him up with an arranged marriage and is bringing women, to every single family dinner. And like one of my first notes is that about the family is that they're not incredibly supportive of him.
No, yeah. I think one of my first ones was that the sibling dynamic was really, really accurate.
Yeah, sure.
But no one in the family seemed to like listen. They all just spoke. Like there was a lot of talking, but not a lot of like actual conversation.
Yeah, and the main aspects about Kumail's life. He wants to be a comedian, you know, he wants to live his own life. They're just like swept under the rug within the family dynamic because they believe that that's like the lowest tier of life for him. He should be aiming higher, and in that respect they do care about him, of course, but they have these expectations of him outweigh what he wants.
I guess that must be relatable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That sort of your family caring about you and wanting to support you, but also wishing for you to do something more fiscally responsible with your life, and sort of rather than following your passions, following something that will give you a good career. He does it really well. It's really, really easy to step into Kumail's shoes during the movie and sort of see where he's coming from. And there's like a lot of very, very interesting and like uncomfortable topics brought up within the family dynamic versus, of course, arranged marriage. The fact that the mother, whenever she brings someone in to set him up with, it's played for amusement. Like they sort of sit there. I think it's the first time we see one of the arranged marriages, and the doorbell rings and she goes, "Oh, I wonder who that could be," and like walks off. And everybody around the table is like, "Oh, you know, $5 that she just dropped by," or something like that is mentioned, and it's played for laughs. But then when she actually brings the person in, there's like silence. No one reacts to it. They're all just quite like uncomfortably polite. And you get this really good, in my opinion, juxtaposition between like, oh lol, she does this all the time, and the fact that it's actually very uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think the humor is I think many people can probably agree, it's a defense mechanism towards the discomfort. And throughout the film, I think the mother is the only one who directly confronts or doesn't appreciate Kumail's sense of humor. So it's why in many of the situations, he doesn't have a sense of humor around her. And I find his throwaway joke, "Who can bet that it's going to be another person?" I think it's used to highlight that, you know, how many times this has happened, rather than make a joke, if anything.
Yeah, it's like he's got one of those like little boxes sitting in his room, and when he comes home he opens it and he chucks the picture of the girl on top, like the profile, into his box, and you get just from that scene of him chucking it in the nonchalance at which he's just doing this for his mother and his family, and the fact that it's happened many times before.
Would you agree with me that at the start of the film, Kumail definitely comes across as very much like he intends to be a people pleaser? He wants to make people... he just wants to keep people happy, even if that means just passively going along with things.
He seems very, very passive throughout a lot of the movie, and wherever he's making jokes, the jokes are usually to make an uncomfortable situation, or attempt to make an uncomfortable situation more comfortable for him or for the people around him. He's definitely trying to make people laugh, even if it's an awkward laugh. Like he's just like, "Oh, aha, look, this is so funny."
Absolutely.
He feels like a bystander in his own life to me. In a lot of what's happening.
But that's the way this film works. I don't think, like, Kumail is definitely the main character, for sure. But this is about Kumail's life, not necessarily about Kumail. As a result, you know, we see things happen around him as well as to him, and he's not necessarily always the subject of the story.
He's not always the subject of the story. It's more what the story is doing to him. Like, he's not the catalyst, and he's not what drives the plot forward until, like, maybe the last third of the movie is when he sort of starts doing things. I would say even maybe the last quarter of the movie is when we really start to see Kumail come into his own, and sort of take the reins. But obviously... that's for a little bit further down in our conversation. I kind of want to talk about Emily. We've kind of pushed her to the wayside.
Well, we'll get on to Emily for sure, because it's super important. It's
the love interest.
The love interest. The soul of this story is about them meeting. But I was going to just quickly say about Kumail, before I lose this train of thought, he only really starts to take action by the end, but you can see the development as it goes, and I think that really is like a testament to this movie and this, you know, story,
I
That
think it's a
does,
testament to the pacing of the
yeah,
movie.
absolutely. The pacing is incredible because it manages to compress time without ever losing sense of what's happened in the story. But we should talk about Emily as well before we get further on into it.
Their little meet cute is so funny to me.
Yeah.
He's doing stand up at this bar and he asks if anyone's from Pakistan and she puts her hand up. And I just really, really like it because they immediately have this chemistry because she puts her hand up and he sort of has this, oh, you think you're funny type of like vibe with her.
Yeah.
And then.
Doesn't she woo?
No, she doesn't woo. He goes,
Oh, okay. My
is
mistake.
anyone from here from
Yeah,
Pakistan?
Pakistan.
Or is anybody Pakistani? And she puts her hand up, and he goes, really? I feel like I would have seen you,
Oh,
because
right.
she's
Yeah.
white. She's Caucasian. And he has a bit of like dialogue in his stand up with her, and then they move to after the stand up where he walks over to her and sort of starts flirting, and her friend who was with her sort of like stands up and walks away.
Yeah. I think she
Mm.
gets the hint.
Yeah, and they have like a really engaging and amusing banter. Like
Yeah.
it's very real. I think we've said that a lot.
The
Is that this film
conversation
is very
feels
real.
fluid. In a very
It's
sense.
fluid.
Yeah.
There are silences and pauses, but
Yeah.
they feel natural. It's not like
Hmm.
you say your line, you say your line. It's very push and pull.
Well, yeah, and that was
And
something
it's
I was going to
engaging.
say, is that what this film does with silence is actually really interesting because the mood or atmosphere of the silence is dependent on the people Kumail is with.
Mm-hmm.
In that, with Emily, the silence is actually heartwarming and it's bringing the two characters closer together, whereas the silence in his family is pushing them apart.
Yeah, there's the sort of comfortable versus uncomfortable silences.
Yeah.
And it is entirely dependent on who he's talking to and the topic of conversation, which is super interesting. I just really like this film. I really like Emily and Kumail's relationship. They go on this sort of date and they end up, pretty quickly going back to his apartment, and they both sort of do the, oh, I'm not dating
Yeah, they give each
anybody
other
right now.
excuses.
And then we see them on their next date, and it's sort of that feel of, even though they said that they wouldn't see each other anymore, they like immediately almost
See
are
each
back
other
together.
again.
I think one of my favorite points where you can really see their relationship develop and blossom is the diner scene or the bathroom scene where Emily is trying to is in their house and it's like 3 a.m. or something, and she's trying to leave to the diner because she wants to go to the bathroom and she doesn't want to do it in his house. And it's super cute. It's really, really funny, and it shows their relationship really well. It's like a small moment, but a big developmental moment for them. And I really, really like watching it, especially when she sort of comes out and they're sitting in front of his sort of like apartment complex together, and he just goes like, so how are you, or something to that effect. Like, it's just very, very cute.
Oh yeah,
and
it's
real.
adorable.
Like, a lot of bonding moments, I think, do come from weird things like that. Like, it's all well and good to get along great with someone, but as Will and I could probably attest, even with our friendship, a lot of, like, bonding moments come from the weird or the, like...
Yeah, the weird situations of
times
potential
of need.
awkwardness. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And yeah, the non-diner bathroom scene is definitely like super cute, and it's a really interesting point because they get an opportunity to be honest in a moment of self-deprecation or embarrassment, and it ends up going really well. Everybody gets what they want and nobody's necessarily embarrassed too much about it, or no one's feelings are hurt, and it's a really interesting moment in the film for sure, because I also feel like people are honest in this film, like brutally honest in this film.
Oh, yeah. There's people are very, very, I reckon you're this way, or I reckon you're that way. It's refreshing and also kind of jarring in a way, because they just tell it like it is.
Yeah, it's definitely surprising, I think, because it's really surprising to see every single person you meet in this film is just brutally honest, from their, perspective, of course, but brutally honest about other people to a fault. Where it's like that thing that one of the characters could have said definitely could have hurt someone's feelings. they said it anyway, and then the world keeps turning.
Yeah, and they use this for both good moments and bad moments. So
Yeah.
we just talked about a point where they were very brutally honest in the sort of bathroom scene, and then a couple scenes after that, Kumal and his brother are playing
Baseball.
baseball. Thank you. I
Yeah.
wanted to say cricket, and then I was like, no, I
Cricket,
think
not
that's an
cricket, no.
Australian thing. And they're sort of sitting in the diner. Kumal tells his brother about Emily and the fact that he's been seeing, quote unquote, a white girl. And they're very, very real in that moment. I think they get into a bit of an argument. It pulls on the heartstrings about
Yeah.
sort of arranged marriage. You know that it's coming because this has been the main sort of like issue of the film, is the fact that he doesn't tell his family about Emily.
Yeah.
But then the brother says, "Mum will fucking ghost you," I think is the quote that I put down. And it's really honest and upsetting, and it speaks volumes on the family that he sort of opens up and says, "Hey, I'm dating this girl, but she's not Pakistani." And his family is immediately like, "Oh, okay, well, you'll get over her really quickly. You can't stay with her."
Yeah, and it's such a almost like a taster into the heavier scenes to come. This baseball scene where we're given an instance of knowing that the two sons are talking about it in this way, like she will fucking ghost you, and it's not a throwaway joke or jokey line. It's
played
a
very,
genuine,
very straight. Yeah.
it's a genuine like concern coming from his brother. It's this weird point where you know that you don't fully understand the dynamic of this family, but you can understand it because we're looking at it through Kumal's perspective.
Yeah, and I think one of my notes on this is, you know it's coming. You know leading into this conversation that there's going to be a second where his brother says something along the lines of, "Drop it, drop her, it's not what our family wants for you," type of thing. But it still catches you off guard. Like, even I've watched this movie, I think 3 times in the last year. And every single time that scene just catches me. Like, I'm never prepared for it.
Yeah, little scenes like that are scattered throughout the early part of the film because it leads up to a point where you can always feel the conflict of the film coming. And you're not sure when it's going to happen, and your assumption is that it's going to happen halfway through the film because this is a romantic comedy. The conflict always comes in the middle, but it doesn't. It comes like very
a little
early.
Later.
Oh, I was going to say very early, as in like
very early.
the stereotypical
hints of it,
conflict.
The stereotypical conflict.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No,
I mean,
I'm with you.
yeah.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so like in all films, there's always a conflict. Since we're looking at a romantic comedy, the stereotypical conflict in this sense is that the girlfriend or the love interest would find out about the secret. And we get to that point, we like feel that point coming early on through the film, but then it happens quite early in the film, and it's almost jarring how early it happens.
Yeah, it is incredibly jarring, especially because before that, we were getting like juxtapositional shots between like him at the family dinner setups with like these girls being incredibly stiff versus the very, very casual time of him spending like couch time or just like chilling around with Emily. And it really shows where he's comfortable versus where he's expected to be comfortable really, really well. And then almost incredibly quickly after that, we get to this big secret being revealed, and you kind of go, whoa, wait, there's still a lot of time left on this movie. What's going on, you know?
Definitely. The first time I watched this, I was like, wait, we got like an hour left of the film. Holy shit. What's gonna I mean, ultimately you kind of have an expectation that more's gonna happen since the title of the film is The Big Sick. But this is, for most people who watch romantic comedies, this is definitely a crisis point kind of situation where she doesn't want to talk to him ever again because of this secret that he's been keeping. Just a few scenes earlier, she'd revealed to him that she had been married, and this also isn't like this huge spoiler because it comes good 20 minutes into the film.
Yeah, it's really even hard to pick spoilers for this movie. Like,
Yeah.
because of the way that it's laid out, and because, you know, like, we read the synopsis to you, and in the summary it says family expectations destroy their romance. You know, like, you see it coming. It's not a spoiler. It's part of the storyline, so integrally, but it still comes so quickly. And then
Yeah.
obviously she's talking about the fact that she's been married before, and in that same scene where they're talking about that, she says something like, "I am overwhelmed by you," I think were her words,
Yeah.
when talking about how she wasn't expecting to fall for Kumal. And it's really, really relatable. It's played really well as this sort of, he took her marriage, or her previous marriage, pretty well, all things
Yeah.
considering. They're out at like a fancy book restaurant. I don't know what they're
I think they
doing
were doing a
besides
wine
wine
tasting.
tasting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like in a library. It
Weird
kind of
adult
confused
shit.
me. Yeah, exactly. And he
I
asks
say
her
that
why
like I'm
she
not
knows.
23.
Shh, no one has to know we're adults. But she says something along the lines of, when you're an alcoholic, a really good way to cover it is knowing a lot about wine. And she like mentions that it's because she was unhappy in her last marriage.
Yeah.
And Kamal's like, "Whoa, hang on, you just dropped like a really big piece of information." And they go back to banter after having that conversation, but it doesn't quite hit the same as all of their other banter, because there's a bit of a,
Yeah, sort of overshadowed.
yeah, tension. There's
Mm.
still some underlying tension there. And then a little bit later, she finds out that he's been keeping a secret. And he sort of shoots back with, "Well, you didn't tell me you were married." And she's like, "Except I did. I chose to
Yeah.
tell you that." And it's like a really big point.
Yeah, and I think for the fight scene or argument scene, it's this point of, we've been saying multiple times, this film is relatable to a T, but it's sometimes uncomfortably relatable in that, in this moment of conflict where Kumal has been, for most of the film, a very passive kind of bystander in situations. When he's having to meet with conflict, he spouts the wrong responses.
Yeah, they both escalate
Yeah,
incredibly quickly, and it gets really messy really fast.
yeah,
And you're right, it is uncomfortably relatable, because how many times have you been in a situation where somebody's done something that makes you uncomfortable, or something's set you off in a specific conversation, and you've immediately gone on the defensive, or
yeah.
immediately like gone on the attack, and escalated the situation that probably could have been handled more
Too many
civilly,
to
just because your emotions are too high.
Yeah, too many to count. When you questioned my pointless research last week, no, I'm not even gonna pretend.
You
No,
love me.
yeah. Ultimately, like, the fight scene is really so good because it's so uncomfortable to be in,
Hmm.
and the framing of it. Like, I think the only time I'm gonna commend the cinematography, not as if that's a bad thing, not like the rest of the cinematography is bad, but when we find out that Emily knows about the box, we see it framed in a way that it's almost as if we're watching her from the kitchen, and she's obscured.
Yeah.
And I find that really amazing, because it's just like, in real life, if we caught a glimpse of someone uncovering a secret that could ruin
We wouldn't
our
be like
relationship.
panned in on the box. We wouldn't be getting
Yeah.
a close up of her looking through all the photos. You see her like closing the box in like a side, slightly cut off, like almost
Yeah.
from the kitchen, like you said, scene. And then even the argument itself is framed with like, she's in the doorway and he's in the other room. Like they're almost in
Yeah.
separate rooms the whole time they're arguing.
Yeah, and it's all framed in a unapologetically real way, and I think that's perfect for it.
Hmm.
Because, like, yeah, the scene where she finds the box and we see it from almost afar, where we see her walk towards the corner that we know the box is in, we're like, oh god. And then the conflict starts, and the stereotypical conflict starts, and it's just harrowing to watch, because again, you relate to it so much, because who hasn't been in a fight like that when they didn't want to be in a fight like that? And like, for Kumal, he goes into that argument completely unprepared and ends up really hurting Emily.
Yeah, I think they both end up hurting each
Oh
other.
yeah, absolutely.
But Kamal really does a lot of damage. I think something that Emily says is, like, do your parents even know about me?
Yeah,
And he doesn't say anything. And she immediately gets, like, visibly more upset. And you
yeah,
just, in that moment, you're like, oh my god, I don't want to be watching this. Like, this is,
yeah,
you're watching the relationship fall apart, and it's so well framed, it's so well done that you literally feel like somebody who's just like walked through the door
yeah.
and like gotten caught in this argument and can't leave because then they'd notice you were there. Like,
Mm. And like well, I don't know about you, but while I was watching it, through my head, I was just thinking like there are upwards of 100 ways that he could have handled this better. Sure, she doesn't fully understand his culture and where his family come from, but there are 100 ways to handle this better. But I know for certain, if I were in this situation, I would have handled it worse.
yeah,
You
it's
know?
that sort of thing where while you're sitting there and he says something or she says something and you go wrong or
Yeah,
bad
yeah,
move. That wasn't the correct way to take this conversation. But
yeah.
also, if you were there yourself, you would be like, yeah, no, I too would be incredibly upset and not
Oh,
thinking clearly.
absolutely, yeah,
It's super interesting that like it happens so early on.
yeah,
And I suppose now would probably be a very good time for us to give a spoiler warning because everything that we
absolutely.
sort of discuss from here on out would be considered like spoilers.
We're 30 minutes into the film, so ultimately anything else beyond here is a spoiler.
If
So,
you haven't seen the movie yet, if you've just been listening to us talk and you're super intrigued, it is available on Netflix, or at
yes.
least it's available on Australian Netflix. Sorry to anybody else who lives anywhere else. Just give it a quick Google. I'm sure you can find it. I would really, really recommend you watch this movie and then come back and listen to us
You
talk about
know,
the rest
I
of it.
would too, honestly. I've watched it through twice. First time, again, like I said, I fell asleep.
I was so upset.
If you want to watch it the Will experience, then fall asleep halfway through, wake up feeling well rested, and then watch it again. And I guarantee you will enjoy it even more. I assume. Because, look, I really enjoyed it. And I missed, like, a good chunk of it first time through. I woke up and I was like, hey, this film is really good. And, yeah, and like Monika said multiple times, she was livid with me. Looking back on it, would I do it again? Yeah, probably.
Oh
Because
god,
I
I
woke up
swear.
well rested.
You fall asleep like 1 out of every 5 times you come to my house, so.
Yeah, okay, so one thing people are, if I don't say it now, people are gonna figure it out eventually in their own pointless research, but I'm a very sleepy person. I'm a very lethargic person. I fall asleep incredibly easy.
He's like a cat in a sunbeam.
Yeah, but I don't even really need sun to fall asleep.
No,
I
you
might
just
have
need like
narcolepsy.
a ooh, worrying. You just like need a couch and you're pretty much set.
Yeah. Yeah, couch and maybe a warm breeze, and
Couch,
I'm out.
blanket,
Anyway,
or
spoilers. So I think that gave us adequate time. If you didn't watch the entire film in that space,
yeah.
then what are you
You've
doing?
been listening
It's
to
a,
us
it's a
argue about the
remarkably
fact that we'll
short
sleep.
film, you know, as far as we're concerned. But yeah, spoilers have been warned. On with the rest of the film.
On with the rest of the film, I suppose if we're starting in our spoiler area, I'm just going to jump right into it and say after they've sort of broken up, you can see the change in Kamal. Like, he goes on a
Yeah.
couple more of these, like, date things. He has this one man stand up, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
You see him perform it once, and Emily gives her opinion on it, and then he doesn't perform it again until later when Emily is sick, where he starts sort of working on it again and inputting her feedback. Like, it's
Yeah.
a very, very interesting development for his character.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, you've got this sort of what they're doing outside of each other, and then we have this phone call.
Oh god, the phone call is incredibly well done. Can I
Mhm.
just say, like, the only bit of sound design that I genuinely noticed, there are two bits of sound design that I genuinely noticed. This one is definitely one of them, because we're given silence, again, and it's something I love. If you use silence effectively, so Kumal receives a phone call late in the night from Emily's friend, telling him that he needs to come to the hospital because Emily's sick. and no one can stay with her. After receiving that call, it all goes silent, and we see him driving, all
And
silent.
the phone call persists into the drive. Like,
Yeah,
the phone call is him reacting to the phone call, but then you're getting the last of the friend's words while he's already in the car, which helps, like, add the, like, quick, urgent nature.
it moves you through the edit, so that's a really useful editing technique. So anyone who actually wants to know about editing, if you lead with sound, like this film does in this scene, it eases the transition into the next cut. So we get the audio from the phone call leading or moving into these cut where we see Kumail driving to the hospital, and then in the hospital frantically looking for someone to tell him where Emily's room is. And because we have the sound leading through each of the scenes, the cuts between them is, the jarringness of those cuts is minimized.
Yeah, it's very minimized because while there's silence, while he's on the phone and the phone transitions into the car, the music transitions into the hospital. Like, it's a really step-by-step process there, and
It's
I
also
really...
like the only bit of music I actually noticed as well, which was really nice.
Yeah, I think this was the music that I noticed, and then the other bit of music that I noticed was at the start, like when he's in the car and he's jamming.
Yeah,
They use like a song with lyrics, and
that's
I'm like,
fair.
oh, look, he's in the car, he's having a jam sesh. It was like quite nice. This is an incredibly tense moment,
Yeah.
and we don't know why Emily's sick. We know that she's been put in hospital and that she's kind of really groggy when he gets there. She's a bit put out to see him. She's like, what the fuck are you doing here?
Yeah.
I really just want to go home. I don't need my ex-boyfriend showing up to the hospital, type of vibe.
Yeah.
But it all spirals so incredibly quickly from here. And this is the part that really started to hit home with me. It's like all of the medical stuff and how quickly it moves.
For me, I definitely don't have personal experience, but knowing you, I understand where there is a definite dread when it comes to all of this. When you see a hospital room has this sense of tension just innately within it because of all the thoughts that it drums up.
Just the call, X is in the hospital, they're really sick. It's exactly how it would happen in the middle of the night. I think he's even like in that phone call, like he's picked someone up at the bar and taken them home, and he gets this phone call and we don't see what happens to her. Presumably she gets kicked out because he cares so much about Emily that
No,
he's
she
like,
just
nah.
lives there now.
It's just her and the very, very upsetting roommate.
Oh yeah. We'll talk
He's
about him
very
later.
upsetting. But it all moves very quickly. And one of the nurses comes in and says that they've got a room ready for Emily, and she goes, no, I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed. And then like the next scene is the doctor speaking to Kumail about the fact that
You're given this sense that she's disoriented, Kumail's disoriented, the audience is disoriented, and it's very anxiety inducing for anyone watching, because it just has this sense that no one knows what's going on. The doctors might know what's going on, but we don't. So in this situation, no one knows what's going on, and we're all in the dark.
No one knows what's going on. Yeah, and there's this sort of transition about like the doctor asks to speak to Kumail when they're moving her, because she says that she doesn't want to get moved to this room, but then they move her to the room, and when they're moving Emily to this room, she's incredibly out of it. She doesn't know what's going on. Kumail is following along with the bed, and the doctor goes, I need to speak to you. Are you her husband? And he goes, no, I'm not. And he goes, look, she's got this infection in her lungs, and we need a family to sign off on the medical procedure to put her into a medical coma. Otherwise she might not make it out, like the infection might spread. So I'll ask again, are you her husband?
Yeah, and I think that moment is really, you get a clear understanding of what's going on. Well, this is the clearest understanding you get in this moment, where the doctor knows that Kumail's not her husband, but he's there with her, so he can sign off on it because the doctor knows that Emily's condition is guaranteed to deteriorate.
Yeah, it's that sort of like, you're here and we need to do this now.
Yeah, a little bit later when the parents come back, we'll return back to where we are before, but the parents acknowledge that and they say, like, thank you for signing off on it, because they also know the situation.
Yeah, it's that sort of thing. It also puts Kumal in like this really interesting spot where
Yeah.
he then has to call after he's signed off on
Oh
this. We
god,
don't
yeah.
get to see him sign off on it. The next thing that we see is Emily asleep in the bed. Kumal picks up her phone and uses her thumb to like
Yeah.
unlock her phone and call her parents. And you get this sort of feeling, like even as the viewer, I felt like this. I was like, oh god, Kumal just put her in that coma. Like he
Yeah.
made that decision for her, and now he has to call her family
I
and tell
also
them what's
yeah.
happened.
I also really like that this is the second situation where he's been forced into a position where he has to he has to take action. And this is the second time beyond the first time, which was like the conflict, the argument. This is where he has to just take action and call them. And he responds in a very similar way to the first time, but with an intent to try and do right.
Yeah, like I think he starts the phone and he's like, "Oh, hi, this is Emily's phone. I just want that you to know right off the bat she's fine. The doctors, she's in this hospital and the doctors have
Yeah.
had to put her in a medically induced coma." He talks for a little bit, gets cut off, and then goes, "Yes, I did say coma." And you
Yeah.
can just, like, he's trying his best to give this information as unthreateningly as possible, but there's no good way to say, "I had to put your daughter in a coma." Like,
Yeah, the awkwardness and the almost like the cringe comes out and almost hits you with like a brick in this scene where you're just like, oh god, did you really say it like that? But
yeah, and it's super interesting to me as well. They don't like slide past how he gets the phone unlocked. Like they actually show him
yeah,
taking her fingerprint and unlocking her phone to show like how weird this whole situation is. That like he wouldn't usually be the person that was there with her, but he is, and it's all just adds to this sense of uncomfortable unknown because he doesn't know what her phone passcode is, but he needs to be able to contact her family.
yeah.
And it's just upsetting.
Yeah, it does tension really well, and I actually have this belief that comedians know how to know how to depict tension in a really good way, but that, we'll expand on that in
A little
episodes
later.
to come. But yeah, it's the moments of tension and uncertainty and discomfort are really well done in this film for sure.
Yeah, even like sitting here now and talking about it, I've got like a plushie in my hands that I can squeeze because it's really well conveys that sense of like anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, yeah, the parents come and, attend to their daughter. I can't remember, but were they in town?
No, I think they live out of town and they like drive down.
Yeah, I'm only asking because in a previous scene when Kumal and Emily are like shopping together, she says, "My parents are going to be in town. Do you want to, are we going to meet them?"
Yeah, so I don't know. I think they might live by American standards, like the next state over or
Yeah.
something. So they're like far away, but not too far away. I don't think they live in town, and I
No,
don't
I don't
think
think
they're
they do
in
either.
town at the time of her hospitalization. I think they
No.
were like, because one of the quote unquote things that sparks one of the fights is that he never wants to go and meet her parents.
Yeah.
Because there's that whole thing where she goes, "Oh, my parents will be in town. You should come have dinner with us." And he goes, "Oh, no, there's this 2-day rule where I can't see you more than 2 days in a row," type of thing.
And I was more asking that just because time is really compressed in this film.
Yeah.
So it could have been could have actually been convenient, or not convenient, but
It's never explained.
yeah. But that doesn't
To
matter.
me, I feel like he calls them and they're not in town, but I feel like they're only a couple of hours away. Like they only
Yeah.
live a couple of hours away.
Because they get there the next morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, look, the dad, Ray Romano.
Yes. Rey Romano is the dad. He plays Terry.
Yes, Terry is the
Terry.
dad's name. And the mother, Beth, well, the mother's name, that was a little bit self-explanatory. And that she's
Holly
played
Hunter.
by Holly Hunter,
She's played
yeah.
by Holly Hunter, yeah. Yeah, they're great. Oh my god, I actually really like the parents so much.
They add a lot of like character and life
Yeah.
in because we've been sort of stuck with I say stuck, but like for the first sort of half of the film you've got the family who are all very similar. Kumal's family, you have Kumal, you have
Yeah.
Kumal's friends who are all comedians, so they're all quite similar, and then you have Emily and Kumal, himself. And then these parents come in, and they're very, very different to Kumal,
Yeah.
but also different to each other, which is super interesting to see.
And in such a way that their differences are almost celebrated between the two of them, where they work because they're different, like
Yeah.
so different from each other. And
Like-
I'm gonna say something that's probably controversial. I've never seen Everybody Loves Raymond, but I'm going to say that Rey Romano playing Terry is probably his best role. I thought, genuinely, I really, really like his character.
Yeah, the cadence to his voice, which is iconic, obviously.
Oh god, yeah.
And like the fact that he plays a character that talks for the sake of filling space
Yes.
really,
Oh, man.
really lends itself to this film.
Yeah.
And then there's the juxtaposition of when they see Kumal, Beth, the mother, is immediately standoffish, immediately she gives off this sort of like, I am incredibly intense and incredibly angry
Yeah.
all of the time. Whereas Ray is more like, okay, hey, look, the doctors, we'll talk to them, they'll tell us. And he gives off like I am nervous, but I am a dad, so I'm trying to tell you that I'm not nervous by like talking out my ass all of the time.
I'm just gonna keep talking
until something nice comes out.
Yeah, until the tension is gone. It has gotten bored and died.
But we don't get a lot of time to ruminate on them first up, because we immediately go into them sitting in this room. You can see a bit of the like comedy background of Kumal's coming out here, because they're sitting in a bereavement room waiting to hear the news about Emily, and the nurse is like, don't worry about the fact that it's a bereavement room, it's one of the only rooms we had available. And I heard that and I was like, this may be true, or this could be a part of the film that was exaggerated, because it feels like a very
it feels humor
comedy
direct.
moment.
Yeah,
humor direct,
as in like it's directed in a humorous way.
Thank you. I was like,
I did need to explain that because that doesn't make sense. Humor direct, that's not a thing. Yeah, no, I agree completely, and probably been put in there just to add like a little bit of humor, just a sprinkle, a little bit of awkward humor.
It's there, and it's a little out of place, but it's really, really needed, because right after that we go straight into what I like to call the medical jargon, where they're talking to several different doctors, and you never hear the full sentence that a doctor is saying before it switches to the next doctor talking to them. You can see Beth is sort of aggressively asking questions, and Terry is aggressively, or not aggressively, but he keeps asking how to spell things because he's taking all of these notes down, and like they're just sitting there and they're trying to figure out like what's wrong with her, and they're trying to understand why she's here and why she's been put in a medical coma, and it's all chaotic and confusing and upsetting, and you feel
the confusion that surely all these characters in this moment would be feeling, because we jump between doctors so quickly we're not given a full picture at all, and we never will be given a full picture. Kumal, our main character, our protagonist, sits there and just watches it happen, and it fits with his passive kind of bystander character for a good period of the film, where he's just letting it all happen, not getting involved, but still being there. You can't assume what he's thinking, but ultimately, the best he can do, well, I assume he feels like the best he can do is just be there.
And after the medical jargon scene, he sort of stands there and he goes, in a very someone who does comedy for a living fashion, well, I've learnt a lot today. There's apparently bad comas and good comas, and the type that Emily's in is the good kind. And it's a very, he's dumbing it down to try and get a smile, but also to put a positive spin on what's happening.
And I think in a way he's grasping at any silver lining that he can get, and then just focusing on that. It's she's in a good coma, so there's that, and I think that is a good testament to his character, in that he wants to make people feel better, and it's why he probably became a comedian,
Yeah, exactly. And then Beth immediately sort of after that tells him that he can go home. I think one of the lines that really, really struck me here, once again, all of the characters in this are so incredibly honest, but she says something along the lines of, you don't need to feel any obligation. You obviously didn't while she was awake. You don't need to now that she's asleep.
Yeah.
or something along the lines of that. Very, very like backhanded. You gave up on her while she was still
Not
well,
in a coma. Yeah.
and now that she's in a coma, you shouldn't feel any obligation to stick around.
Yeah.
So Kamal leaves. He goes back to doing what he usually does, but the way that it's framed, you can tell that it's eating away at him and that he really cares about what's happening and is worrying about what might be happening to Emily, because he's not there and it's the only thing he thinks about. All of his friends are joking in the back room of the bar where they have stand-up, and he sort of interrupts them, or they ask him what he thinks and he just goes, "It's okay that I'm not there, right?"
Yeah.
Like, that's his first foray into their conversation.
And I think in a typical, because I'm going to bring in story and like story structure now, because I can't really talk about cinematography, because we've already discussed that it's pretty simple. In terms of story, this is his call to action. And a stereotypical story, you'd get that quite early on. You know, Luke chooses to go and save the universe in Star Wars, and that's his call to action is when he's given the opportunity to leave home. Kumail's call to action in a stereotypical story arc comes quite late.
Yeah,
Because-
it's not at the start of the movie,
Yeah.
where it would usually be the catalyst for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, well,
His
yeah.
call to action is after two of our big climaxes, which
Yeah.
is the argument
Not
and the
climax, just crisis, I think.
crisis. Thank
Yeah.
you. That's probably, I'm thinking about
You're-
climax resolution, but
You're all good. But yeah, it's
it's
his-
after the
Oh, yeah,
argument
sorry, you
and
go.
it's after the sickness.
Like, you could argue that his call to action is the sickness, but he's passively brought to that. When the moment where he actively chooses to go and be with her, even though she's in a coma and she doesn't know that he's there.
It's when he goes back.
Yeah, when he goes back to try and make things right, that's his call to action. It's the moment he goes into the woods to save the day, but not save the day, but like just to be there. And if all he can do is be there, then he's going to be there.
And he starts at that one, like he comes back and he's treated once again very coldly by Beth.
Yeah.
And sort of like awkwardly, civilly by Terry. And you can then see the juxtaposition in their relationship.
Yeah.
Because he comes and he sort of goes, "Well, I'd like to stay." She goes, "You don't have to be here." And he goes, "Well, I'd like to stay anyway." And then
Yeah.
there's an awkward pause and he goes, "Is this seat?" And Beth immediately moves her like bag onto the seat as if to very clearly say, "Fuck off."
Yeah.
And Terry kind of, you can see that they're both like staring at him when he goes to sit down, and they play it for a bit of comedy where he sort of looks up, sees them staring at him, looks away, and then turns to the person next to him and goes, "Is that lady still staring at me?" Like, it's a very...
I like the juxtaposition where Terry, who's played by Rey Romano, a very tall man, is the point of relief in discomfort, whereas Beth, who is... I actually don't know how tall the actress is, but she's quite short.
She looks short compared to Rey.
she is terrifying to Kumail, and I think that's a really nice juxtaposition.
Tall and calm and short and angry is incredibly accurate.
It does go hand in hand, but it's a nice thing to see in that, because
instead
usually...
of them being like a big imposing dad who's very
exactly.
protective about his daughter, it's like this tiny little rage mum who's like, "You already hurt my daughter.
Yeah.
I'm gonna fuck you up." Like,
yeah, exactly. And I really like that, because it's honest. Again, you know.
and it's relatable in a way. Like, everybody knows that, like, one very, very fiery person where you look at them and you're like, you should not be as fiery as you are. There's not a lot that you can do. Like, a breeze could knock you over. Like, but she's still the main tension in a couple of the next scenes. She's still the main thing that makes Kamal afraid or uncomfortable, and it's all very interesting to see that juxtaposition. Like, Rey Romano as an actor,
Yes.
in his role as Terry, but also in general, is a very like comforting person. He's either played as like annoying or comforting. Like, those are he's never really intimidating, or I haven't seen him intimidating.
No, I haven't either. He has a presence about him that makes things seem easier and better.
Yeah.
His
The way that
mannerisms
he
are always
talks
quite
is
calm.
just nice.
Yeah, absolutely. But with him, I think also a reason why we immediately like Rey Romano's character is because so much of Kumail's character can be reflected in Rey's, in that, sure, Rey is not a quiet character, but he is a bystander in situations.
Passive.
Yeah, he's passive in many situations. And it's, for Kumail, it's good to have a character in the story who actually reflects him, but is still capable of reaching that point where he can confront his problems and then overcome them.
It's sort of the like I'm you, but with a slightly bigger backbone.
Yeah,
Type
it's
vibe.
almost like, weirdly, this film doesn't need a mentor, but he takes that role as mentor in a
He
sense.
takes that role of mentor in a really interesting and unique way, in which
Yeah.
that, like, yes, he is a mentor, but he's a mentor because, like, he's just passively there.
Yeah.
And later on, we're in spoiler areas, so I feel like I can jump
we can
around a
spoil
bit.
anything
But
for any movie.
Kumail has Terry stay at his house because he has an argument with Beth, and Beth goes back to Emily's house. So Kumail says, "Do you want to stay at mine?" And they're talking before they go to sleep, and Kumail's like, "I think we should go to sleep." And Terry immediately blurts out,
Yeah.
"I cheated on Beth," and it, like, keeps talking about it until he's upset and there's nothing else to say. And he says something like, "You know, one day you'll meet a woman and you won't know she's the right woman for you until you cheat on her."
Yeah.
And then after that he says something like, "I thought I could just start talking," and something
And
like,
something smart would come out.
yeah.
Here's the thing. I don't know if you would agree with me on this, but that point is actually really interesting for me, because for me, I pegged Terry as the mentor character because of this moment. Because one thing I noticed in this film is that, like we've said multiple times, characters are brutally honest, but they're brutally honest about other people's flaws. No one is brutally honest about their vulnerabilities in this film. No one except Terry. Terry is the only character who is openly vulnerable with another
Until
character.
a little later.
Yeah. But
he's the first person who we see who vulnerably, like, in that moment, and that's what I mean, is like, he's the mentor character because of that moment, but it's not what a usual mentor moment would be.
Oh, absolutely not. But nothing in this film is like stereotypical to the story, the typical story path, which I personally love.
I really like it, like, because it's not stereotypical.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel cliched, like, you're not sitting there like, "Oh, and this is the part where they get back together," or, you know, like, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But because it's based on a true story, everything that happens still makes sense. Like, there's no, we pulled this out of nowhere for shock value type of vibes. Like, it's all cohesive, it all goes together. Every step that happens is, like, you see, it takes you off guard, but then when you look back on it, you're like, yeah, that's exactly what would have happened in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even just the thing before where I said that, like, it shows you seeing Kumail unlock Emily's phone with her finger while she's asleep. Like, they don't usually leave loose ends. Like, everything has a natural progression, and it all ties up well. That's exactly perfectly what I was trying to say. There you go. But yeah, so it's really we got very, very off tandem here. Very interesting to see that Terry is almost one-for-one reflection of Kumail, with an extra air of, like, vulnerability about himself, almost.
And I think,
that
with
self-awareness.
He's self-aware to a point where he is able to be vulnerable with Kumail, and this introduces a point where Kumail can recognize that if he wants to be better, he needs to be able to be vulnerable or open about himself. The stark realization that all these characters are brutally honest with each other about their other people's flaws, but not their own.
About the fact that, you know, even in the family, the brother says mum won't like that or dad won't like that, and the family goes, you need to date someone like this, you shouldn't be doing comedy, but no one ever turns around and says, I have this flaw, or I'm like this.
I'm worried for you because of this.
Yeah, the only other hint we get to someone being honest about themselves and showing vulnerability outside of this is when they're having their wine tasting, like Emily and Kumail, and Emily says, I am overwhelmed by you. Like, that's the closest we get to someone being honest about their self before this moment.
And it's this really, yeah, it's this really nice kind of thing where in this film, if we follow the simple, or not simple, but if we follow the stereotypical story structure, these moments are guides for the hero to, or protagonist, to reach their full potential. And these moments of internal and self vulnerability from other characters are moments for Kumail to recognize the potential for what being open and honest about himself can do for his life.
It basically is, he says it and it's incredibly awkward, and they sit there in silence for a little bit, and then Kumail realizes that he isn't being honest with himself.
Yeah, and it's great. It's a really nice reflection on how we act and how we treat each other. You know, it's so easy to openly tell someone about.
It's so easy to judge others,
yeah,
but
it's so
not
easy to judge others.
reflect on yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You said it far better than I could have, honestly.
I heard what you were trying to say. We're
Yeah,
just gonna say
thank
things
you.
for each other. Like,
Yeah.
we're a hive mind at this point.
Yeah.
But the really interesting point of that is that before this point, every time that Terry speaks to fill the silence,
Yeah.
it's comforting. And then in this specific scene in the bed, like when they're chilling together after the argument in the hospital with Beth, he speaks to fill the silence, and it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Whereas every other time it's been comforting, it's given you this sort of like jovial sense of like calm and carry on as usual, I suppose I would say. Like he gives the vibe of, yeah, he's just talking and you feel like it's just a normal day despite the circumstances. This is the first time that you're like, oh, okay.
And yeah, I think with Terry's character, in situations where he's been talking, it gives you an opportunity to rebalance when you're feeling on the back foot from these situations where you're presented with no information but only complications and issues and problems. And then this scene that comes where Kumail and Terry are trying to go to sleep, and he brings up this situation where he had cheated on his wife. We'd already had previous scenes where we were almost left exhausted because of the painful situations that we'd had to watch, and you know, the characters are exhausted from a day of conflict and fighting with each other about, do we move Emily, do we not move Emily, are the doctors here good enough or bad enough? Terry has an argument with Beth because she's just not listening to him. She's thinking she knows what's best for her daughter, we're gonna move her, and he's like, can you just listen to me? And she just won't listen to him because she's trying to do everything she can for her daughter. And in this scene, we're just exhausted, and then Terry starts talking, and we're almost like, oh god, I'm falling, and I'm exhausted from the previous scenes, and we're just given this, and it almost feels painful.
It's also super interesting as well because we get a little bit of a hint to what their sort of backstory and why they argue so much is in this conversation, because Ray says something like, it's not all my fault, or it's not always my fault, and Beth, there's a pause, and Beth goes, some things are, and you can tell that she's still holding on to this, and that's the sort of point where then she leaves without him. It's not just about Emily anymore at that exact moment.
No, it's about something else, and I like that when we hear that line, I think, I don't know about you, because I can't speak for you, I know personally, in the back of my mind, I thought, that'll probably be brought up later, it's Chekhov's gun, you know, or Chekhov's affair. And it'll probably be brought up later. I didn't think it'd be brought up so soon, which I actually really like, because you're just not ready for it.
I suppose from someone who isn't in the industry standpoint, who knows about Chekhov's gun, I thought, oh, there's more to that.
Yeah.
But I didn't think it's going to get brought up again. I just went, that's interesting, that's deeper than it sounds, sort of thing. And then when he said it later, I went, that's what that was, So I less anticipated that it was coming, but more noted it as something that was very, like, important, I suppose.
I think if you'll allow me to do a bit of, like, film talk, for people who don't know, Chekhov's gun is a dramatic principle that suggests that details within a story or play will contribute to the overall narrative. So that's what I mean when I say Chekhov's gun. I'll probably use terms like that again, and I'm more than happy to explain them. So,
Please do.
Going forward. So Chekhov's gun basically means if something is like introduced and put center frame, then you can pretty much assume that it's going to be used later on. We will refer back to it later, and then you can be guaranteed that they probably will. That's Chekhov's gun. We'll talk about other things like the Kuleshov effect, but you'll have to wait until later when we actually talk about it.
You're just gonna have to wait until it actually comes up in a movie.
Yeah, exactly. It needs to come up naturally, otherwise I won't talk about the Kuleshov effect.
Maybe one day I can bully Will into
Don't worry,
just
it will come
explaining
up.
it all in. But
maybe not this week, maybe not next week, but we will talk about the Kuleshov effect. But anyway,
eventually I will understand what that means.
We'll talk about the film further, because I can't...
At any rate, I have the argument, I have this moment. I can't remember if it's before or after this. I think it's before this, where initially Kumail takes Terry and Beth back to Emily's apartment and gives them a place to stay. And Beth is intent on staying and researching everything. Like, every time we see her, she's either doing something with her hands, like knitting or crocheting. I can't remember what she was actually doing.
Or she's like nibbling on them,
room.
On her fingernails.
She's biting on her fingernails, or she's on the laptop researching. Get this, she's very intense, but she also is keeping herself busy for a reason. And then you turn around to where Terry is always talking to fill the silence. They get to her house, and Terry's like, "Oh, do you have any parlor games?" And Kumail's like, "What's a parlor game?" And I'm struck by this, oh my god. He doesn't know what parlor games are, type of
reaction.
vibe. But then my favorite is Terry's explaining a specific game, and he's like, "Oh, you try and find a word that no one can rhyme anything with." And Kumail goes, "Stonehenge."
Stonehenge.
And the first time, Terry's character, like, Terry is a character, he's very quiet, and there's a pause.
Yeah.
And he goes, "You see, you would win."
Yeah.
Game. And you can tell that he's, like, mad about it, and it's really lovely, like, insight into the fact that he's probably a competitive person, but it doesn't come out much. And just giving depth and life.
Scene.
Yeah. Depth and life to the characters, and a much needed brevity break from all of the stress of the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely.
But where I was leading up to this is Kumail has a stand-up.
Yeah.
And he lies about being the headliner, and then lies about not being able to get them to go, because he didn't want them to come, but he also wanted to impress them.
Yeah. And it's what I talked about, lying about your vulnerabilities and your self-esteem. It's a good example of that for sure.
Yeah, but they go to the stand-up comedy scene, and there's a heckler in the audience who is incredibly bigoted.
Yeah, I would say he's almost two-dimensionally bigoted, but ultimately, that's not for me to assume.
There's people like that in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And we see how Kumail handles hecklers and how he sort of but before he can sort of get back to his script, because I think he shouts something out, and Kumail goes, "Oh wow, that's really original," or whatever, and the guy goes, "Fuck you," and Kumail goes, "Oh, did you write that at home? That's super cutting edge material."
Yeah, well, before that kind of stuff happens, he tries to just ignore it.
Yeah.
And it's the second instance where he's been met with a heckler, first being Emily, and he responds to that because it's positive. When met with conflict, he doesn't respond to it. He passively passes it by.
Yeah, he just tries to ignore it and keep going. But Beth steps in.
Yeah.
And says something, along the lines of, "What you said makes no sense." And the bigoted guy goes, "Fuck you." And then Kumail goes, "Oh, that's really good material. Did you write that yourself at home?" And gets a bit of laughs out of the audience, obviously trying to play it down and push it away so he can continue with his setup. But I think this is the second where we realize, as much as Beth is being incredibly rude and cold to Kumail, she actually cares about him, and she actually sees that he cares about her daughter, because she goes to bat.
Yeah.
For him.
And from a purely psychological standpoint, this scene is also really good to reinforce the point that Kumail needs to stand up for himself, and also is the starting point for him standing up for himself. because it's a little thing, just, oh, did you write that material yourself? And then he gets a laugh out of it. He stands up for himself a little bit, and then he's rewarded for it.
Yeah, it's sort of that instant gratification of doing something for himself and it going positively.
It's classic conditioning, which is great. In this sense, is really useful.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting. It's also
I almost
amusingly.
said Pavlov's gun.
I was about to say Pavlov's dog, so we were on this.
The psychological experiment is Pavlov's dog. I almost said Pavlov's gun based on Pavlov's dog and Chekhov's gun.
I mean, honestly, as much as it was an amalgamation of two different things, it made sense. Because it is conditioning him to stand up for himself, which comes up later in the film.
Yeah, I guess. You know what? That's fine. Pavlov's gun. I like that.
I want that on a t-shirt. They're talking, and I just really love this scene because it's incredibly serious.
Oh, yeah.
But you also get this moment where, like, Beth lunges for the guy, and Terry has to, like, hold her back. And I remember thinking, in that exact moment, like, how surreally funny it was. Like, this is an incredibly intense and uncomfortable situation, and then you've just got this tiny little woman being held back like a rabid chihuahua.
She almost sparks him out.
I know.
It's incredible.
And he, like, fucking flinches as well. It's very funny.
Yeah.
And then as they're leaving, Beth is sort of being like, fuck you, da-da-da, being incredibly loud. And Ray's like, I'm sorry, everybody. And then turns to the one guy and is like, except for you.
Yeah,
I really want to beat you up.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm not sorry. And this is the first instance we see where Terry can and is fully capable of standing up for himself and confronting people he doesn't like. And it's really, like, it's surprising because we're used to Kumail's style of confrontation, which is not confronting it.
Which is trying to sidestep it or dodge it.
Yeah, but then we're introduced to a character who's like Kumail in many ways, but is also seen as, like, he's the moderator of the characters, and he can ease tension in a certain way, and then he fully stands up for himself without any need for backup. And it's just like, oh god, this guy is a whole person.
Yeah, I'm sorry everyone, except I'm not sorry to you. I really want to beat you up, and these levels go all the way down, motherfucker. And I'm like, he's evidently a very passive person who is not used to aggression, but also is like, no, this is a time to be aggressive.
No,
Fuck
I will
you
stand up for myself.
Yeah.
Even if I'm not good at it, I will do that.
Yeah, even if I'm not good at it, fuck you in particular.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just so good. I think that scene is so good. Like, a little disquieting and a little, like, it made me very uncomfortable, that bit right at the end where he stands up for himself, but it's because I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
Because that's the first time I'd seen it, because I was asleep. First time at that point. Second time I saw it, I was like, oh, this is in the film. And then, But yeah.
You just fell asleep at the worst moment.
Probably. But,
I'm not salty.
I can do that. I'm capable of doing that. I'll fall asleep in horror movies. Anyway, moving forward.
Fighting at the stand-up, and then they all leave. And you realize how much these little knit trio who have been sitting almost every day in this waiting room, like, waiting to hear about Emily, how much they actually care about each other, and how much they've almost unwittingly bonded. Like, they didn't want to bond, but they have.
Just based on sheer proximity, they've gotten closer to each other. And then, when they return from the stand-up, they're all just quite buddy-buddy, and I really like that because it's just a really nice moment, this series of scenes where we're not constantly fighting, we're just having three people chatting and having a good time. And it's almost like a calm moment, which is so wonderful.
They start, like, having a drink or something together. And there's a moment where we've talked about Terry's mentor moment with Kumail, but I think another really big moment that I didn't actually note down, but now that we've mentioned mentor moments is coming back to me.
Absolutely, bring it up.
Sitting with Beth talking about how she and Terry met, and she says, "Oh, my family hated him.
Yeah.
We were a military family, and he was like seen as very hippie, you know?" Or
Hmm.
something along the lines of, because he was a teacher. And Kumal goes, "Oh, how did your family deal
Yeah.
with that?" And she says, "Oh, my father got so angry, he like broke all the plates in the house. And this was back when you could only get like one plate every time you went to the gas station.
Yeah.
But after that, Terry didn't give up. He just kept coming around, and eventually they all got used to him. It was a very yeah, they all hated him at first. They thought he was completely wrong for me, but he stuck around and showed that he actually wanted to be there, and
Yeah.
eventually they accepted it."
Yeah.
And it's a very on the nose example of exactly what Kumal is afraid of telling his parents about Emily.
Yeah, and I think, like, though the cultures are definitely different, Beth almost not serves as, but represents in this story and in Kumal's character arc the marker that everything's going to be okay.
Hmm.
And I
She's
think
sort
that's
of,
so reassuring.
in the grand scheme of all of the themes in this movie, she's the little microcosm of you can get through this.
Yeah, no matter how bad it gets, it'll be okay. Yeah, like I said, I love Beth and Terry as characters because they're just so together. They're these points of reassurance for Kumal that just make everything feel like it's just gonna be okay.
Yeah. They're very parental. They're very
Yes,
caring. They're very reassuring. They're just parents.
they're just parents, yeah, and that's what makes them so great.
Is there anything else that you want to talk about in this sort of area? I know that we're sort
Uh,
of moving through into like the last third of the movie now.
no, I think we can move on to that point. I think if there's anything that we haven't talked about, we'll bring it up again. But yeah, I think if we want to move further, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the next sort of point that I have as like a really big turning point in the movie is they have to do surgery on Emily.
Yes.
They've found the infection in like her lung and they want to do surgery to remove it. They do the surgery, they say all is well and she might be able to go home in the next couple of days, and then she gets exponentially worse.
Yes. Her condition deteriorates.
And this really, really hit me. To give you a bit of context, I was very, very young and had to have major surgery. So watching this and the reactions that the family have to she's going to be fine to actually this is life or death, it really made me think about this is what people go through. This is what my family would have gone through with me. And it's realistically devastating to watch.
Yeah.
And you can tell how hard it hits our main trio and how they take it. And then obviously the fact that they want to move her, but moving her would destabilize her,
Yeah.
and et cetera, et cetera. It's all of this information.
Yeah.
Which leads to where the point that I was actually coming into. Kamal has a breakdown about it. He is listening to voicemails of Emily talking, and it sort of gives us insight into Emily as a character because obviously we haven't really seen her in the light
Yeah, I was gonna say this almost
so far besides anything as the romantic interest.
Yeah, I was gonna say this almost reminds us that Emily is still a person and a character in this film. And
She's not just
yeah,
the woman who's sick that the man will do anything for. She's a person.
She's a person, a character, and she has her own wants and needs, and she's just in a coma. Doesn't change too much of who she is as a person, but she's just in a coma.
And this is what sparks the argument between Terry and Beth, because she backslides in her health. Emily backslides in her health. Beth immediately goes, "This hospital isn't doing enough. We need to move her." Terry's like, "Okay, but listen to the doctors. They did what they did to stabilize her. We don't want to destabilize her moving her," and they don't listen, and that's what starts the argument.
Yeah.
Is all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But Kamal pretty much snaps after this. He breaks down.
I was gonna say the argument about moving her or not moving her. It's the first time he raises his voice. And it's fighting for something that he believes in. So this is the second the second situation where he stands up for something that he believes in, but this time he's not met with encouragement, he's ignored.
Yeah.
And that leads to his breakdown. And this is like a really serious point, but I just wanted to ask you, Monique, how many slices of cheese is too many for a burger? Because I feel like 4 is a lot.
Yeah, I feel like 3 or above is a lot.
I was going to
unless
say
it's like
2
a double...
is the max.
Yes, yeah, 2 is the max. And
Yeah.
even then, it's like 1 slice of cheese per burger patty.
And this is American cheese, and based on my tone, I'm sure that most of you are going to assume that I'm about to go into some pointless research. This week, I have no pointless research. I'm sorry, this is a story based on real life. There's not much I can research.
Disappointing.
I'll be back next week with more pointless research. Don't worry about that. But
basically,
yeah.
It's like the trigger for the breakdown. He's listening to the voicemails, and he
Yeah.
like comes up to this drive-through and asks for a burger with 4 slices of cheese. And the guy on the line says, "I can't do that. Do you want 4 burgers?"
Yeah.
And he fucking snaps. Like, he loses his shit. He gets out of his car and walks up to the like serving window and like shouts and berates and like abuses this poor worker. I feel like really upset for him. Yeah. And then he says something like,
"We both work in retail, so we totally understand how it feels to just be berated." So yeah.
We both used to work in retail, we should say.
Yeah.
But he says, "It's my first day," and Kumail like knocks a bin over and like shouts and screams, and then immediately goes like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and like picks up the bin and like puts all the rubbish back in the bin and gets back in his car. You see how much this is affecting him and how much this backslide in Emily's health has come as a devastating setback to everybody involved.
Yeah, and it's just like this one little thing that sets him off to his breakdown, but it's completely unrelated. It's just one tiny inconvenience that he just doesn't need. And
I think we've all been there. I had a time once, like, I was making my bed and I couldn't get the corner sheet to tuck in properly, and there was so much else going on in my life that was the thing that did it. Like, you know, we've all been there where just one little thing is the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's why it's a saying, like, one little thing can be enough to break you.
I think we can all relate to that. Maybe not to the same extent. I'm sure a lot of people have more self-restraint in situations like that, but like we can all relate to that. But then that like leads almost immediately onto he'd forgotten that he has a gig in 20 minutes and he has to go and do stand-up now.
Just before he goes into his stand-up gig, they do a really interesting thing with the sound.
Yes.
I said that there was only like 2 times that I noticed the sound, but I noticed this. There's like a ringing.
Yeah.
If you've ever had tinnitus or watched a movie where an explosion goes off, it's that sort of ringing.
Yeah. And it muffles out the background.
Yeah. Just it's less of a ringing you're supposed to hear the ringing, and more that the ringing is drowning out everything else.
Yeah.
Like type of ringing. And oh gosh, that point of view where we're looking at like him talking to someone and that's what's happening.
Yeah. He's given he receives a phone call from Terry telling him that they're not going to move Emily. And then it just starts ringing. We don't hear the rest, but you can assume it's nothing good. And then, as I've, alluded to before, you use sound to cut into the next scene in a more seamless fashion. Next cut that we see, he's walking on stage. And you know what's coming next just can't be good. The
tension that they build is really, really interesting. Sometimes, in fact, I would say that it's more tense than some horror movies that I've watched. Like, you watch a couple horror movies where the tension builds and you kind of are like, all right, where's the jump scare? Whereas this, it's building the tension and I'm like, oh my god.
It builds the tension exponentially and then never releases it, in a way that horror definitely does. And I think
it's not as cathartic as horror, I suppose would be the way to put it. Like, it's heartbreaking what happens in the gig. Basically, he tries to start his stand-up, but he breaks down and says something like, it's really hard to do stand-up comedy when your girlfriend's in a coma.
Yeah.
And he gets a couple sympathy laughs from it because people are like, oh, is this a bit? And then it becomes incredibly clear that it's not a bit.
It's harrowing. It's just a harrowing scene where you just get him just letting out his fear and frustration, and just in the worst possible situation, because these people probably paid to come and see comedians, and they came here for a laugh, not to hear about
Yeah.
this.
They're also not a sympathetic ear to his problems. They didn't
Exactly.
expect to be trauma dumped on about this poor man's
Yeah.
experiences with his girlfriend being hospitalized, and in fact, it ends up on the web because somebody
Yeah.
films it. And like just quietly while we're here, they put it on YouTube, and the YouTube that they show dates this movie.
Yes. Yeah, it
It's in a
does.
very old YouTube, but they put it on YouTube, and he sort of has this breakdown, and then you're just left sad. Like, there's
Yeah.
not really a conclusion. He has a breakdown on stage. He bombs his like audition to go to Montreal, or this
Yeah,
stand-up
his
thing
big
that they
chance
were
to
all,
do a big gig. Yeah.
and that's just it. That
Yeah.
sometimes the things that are going on in your life mean that you can't progress
Yeah.
in life.
You're left feeling like this is a really dark ending to what you thought was going to be quite a heartfelt film. But luckily, it doesn't end there. Can't remember specifically how it leads on to this point, but because of Kumail's, like, we're given insight into this quite early on, but Kumail pretty much remembers everything he sees about Emily, or he remembers the little things that matter to him. I was going to bring it up when he uses her thumbprint to get into her phone. You can basically use any fingerprint for the phone, but he knows it's the thumb because, sure, common sense. But like, we get
He
more
would have
and
seen her unlock her phone so
and
many
we
times
get
before.
we get more and more instances of him just remembering little things about her. Because of that, he remembers. We see it in the film, but she injured her ankle, and he remembers, and he tells a nurse about it in an off
Just
off the
before,
cuff.
just before the argument about them not moving her, just
Yeah.
before Terry reveals the affair,
Yeah.
he's talking to the nurse and he says Beth wants to move her. And you hear he's talking to this nurse and says they want to move her, and she goes, no, 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 they put her in the coma for a reason. Like,
Yeah.
if you take her out of this, it'll destabilize her. Do you remember anything happening to her, like any sicknesses that you have?
Well,
And he's like,
yeah. Well, in the
she
film, he like starts spouting off little things that he remembers about her because he's worried that it could be something else that they hadn't caught.
He's
And
like, oh, it could be like, this isn't what it is, but like meninja cockle, or like he starts like spouting things that it could be and reasons he thinks it could be that. And then he goes, he hurt her ankle, and it's,
Yeah, and that ends up being the very thing that gives the doctors insight into waking her up.
Is basically the reason that she's in the state that she is because she hurt her ankle, and because her ankle was hurt, her body saw healthy tissue as an infection and started attacking itself. It's like an autoimmune disease. They call it a big biological misunderstanding in the movie.
And and it leads to her being woken up from her coma and recovering. But it's this little thing where just this one little thing that he remembers about her being the very thing that saves her.
And it just shows you how much he cares about her, even though he acted like it wasn't a big thing to lose her because he didn't want to be with her and like didn't tell his family about her. He really did and does care about her. It actually, before we know that she's woken up, and after his breakdown, he gets visited by his family, because when he went to his stand-up show, he actually missed one of these setups that his mum does. And we sort of got the juxtaposition between when he's at the stand-up with Beth and Terry, like the stand-up that they're at, and this dinner that his family are having with this girl where he didn't show up for it. And they come over to his house and like ask him about it and ask him where he is and why he hasn't been talking to them. And he just stands up for himself. And it doesn't go well, but he still does it. And it's his, like, it's the turning point of his character.
Yeah.
We've been leading up to it with all of these little itty-bitty baby stand-ups, but this is the, like, standoff. He, like, snaps at them and basically says, like, I was seeing this girl this whole time, but I couldn't tell you about her because she was white and she's sick and she's in the hospital and I couldn't tell any of it. Like, any of it to you, and it made me so incredibly sad. The raw power of his acting in this scene is so amazing. Like, it's so easy to empathize with him here. Like,
Yeah.
you just feel every single feeling he's feeling while he's talking to his parents. It's so incredibly relatable.
Yeah, and the sense of like courage that it would have taken him to reveal, basically,
Mhm.
from what we have gathered throughout the film, the worst possible answers of things that he's doing. In that he's doing comedy, he's dating not a Pakistani woman. All these things that he knows will hurt his parents or his parents will not approve of, and but he's still saying it because he needs to be honest with them finally.
And it doesn't end well for him. Like, we
No.
don't get a cathartic, oh, we still love you, son. We get his father calls him selfish.
Yeah.
And his mother says, you are not my son.
Yeah,
And
he gets disowned, and
he gets disowned and
Yeah.
called selfish.
It's not the result that we ever expect to see in film, in that it just doesn't work out for our protagonist.
And then right after this, it's an open wound, basically, that is
Yeah.
left on us and Kumal. His family pretty much just said, cool, thanks for telling us,
Yeah.
get fucked.
It's like we know, and he knows that it's the right thing to do, but his life is left worse off because of it.
And then right after that, we get the Emily's awake scene.
Yes.
And that doesn't end well for him either.
Yeah, this is supposed to be a relief, and it is at first. But then he gets to go and see her, and despite the mother and father, Beth and Terry, saying like, he was here the entire time, he was here for you the entire time, and being very supportive of Kumal in general, which is great. Emily is just brutally and heartbreakingly honest with him, and
Yeah.
sure, she's
Drugged
drugged
up.
so that she has no social inhibition, but she is just so honest with him about how she hates him. She doesn't want to see him ever. She just doesn't want to look at his face, and he just, like, this kind of reaction, it's this point where it's not a fantasy, this is real life. Last time she saw him, she hated him because he lied to her and kept secrets from her, and she has no idea about the character arc or the change that he's been through because she wasn't around for it. She was in a coma.
Yeah.
And she's just telling him how she feels, and it's heartbreaking for him because though he's gone through great change and he knows what he wants and what he wants to be with her, to her that's just not an option, and she doesn't want that. What I find, like, she tells him to piss off and leave. What I found, like, really interesting is that Kumal struggles to leave even after being told to piss off. It's almost like you just can't leave with this kind of closure. You leave it with this closure. He's been there, he's been going there and showing up for months and staying there for months, we assume.
It's another sort of, like, this is the part where in any other romantic movie, they would get back together.
Yeah.
But she tells him to go.
She tells him to leave.
And, you know, Emily is entitled to her feelings, and she's not incorrect with what she says. Like, he did really hurt her, and she hasn't been around for his emotional development like we, the viewers, have.
Yeah.
But it still hurts.
Oh, absolutely.
And Kamal respects that and leaves.
He respects it, and, well, he tries to leave, but then also he kind of, like, wavers in the hallway for a bit, which I found really interesting because it's almost like he's come this far, he doesn't want to just walk away from it all because he's grown so much that he's willing to stand up for what he believes in, but he's also willing to accept her feelings and understand her feelings, so he's stuck in a midpoint where his growth actually stops him from leaving.
Yeah, and there's this second that we get that is really, really, like, bittersweet, where he sort of has this awkward, silent, mutual look with him and Terry. It's heartwarming because they both understand that Emily doesn't want to see him, but they've both been through so much together, and they have this sort of, like, look and goodbye.
Yeah.
And then Beth comes out and talks to him and says goodbye to him, and you really see how far they've come as a trio.
Yeah.
because he says, "All right, goodbye. I suppose I won't see you around." And Beth goes like, "Maybe, but I hope not," sort of
Yeah.
thing, like implying that yeah, Emily doesn't want to see him, but she does. Beth wants to
Yeah,
see
we
him.
don't necessarily want to never see you again. And I really like that scene because, again, they're parents.
Mm,
So Beth understands that they're not going to manipulate or persuade Emily to feel a certain way about someone who they've grown to care about. They're going to respect their daughter's wishes and trust that their daughter knows what's good for her own mental well-being. But even so, they still feel a little regret at not getting to have that conclusion that Kumal fought for, and that they all they really wanted was their daughter to be okay. But they also know who Kumal is now and how much he's changed. So they hope that they'll see him again, but they know that they're never going to actively be able to change anything because that's what good parents do. They let
mm.
their children grow.
Exactly, exactly. At this point, the pace of the movie picks up and goes
Yeah.
pretty quickly,
Oh yeah.
which is apt because I feel like I'm starting to get a bit conscious of time. Um, but basically, what happens from here is he does leave. It's really hard for him to do so, but he does leave. And Emily starts going through physical therapy. Obviously, she's been in a coma for a while, so they do a lot of
Yes.
physical therapy to get her back to where she was before. And when she leaves the hospital, they throw a party and they invite all the nurses, and Beth invites Kumal. And
Yeah.
Kamal brings this final ditch effort.
He calls it his bag of devotion.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so upsetting.
Yeah, but I also really like it because it's just so raw and real, and
hmm
I love that.
It's following on with this theme of just because the last couple times that he's been open and honest and vulnerable with people it hasn't worked, doesn't mean that he's not hit that change in his life and is
Yeah.
continuing to be vulnerable with people. He pulls out, all the parking ticket stubs that he's got and like all of his visitor passes and the ashes of all the Pakistani women.
Yeah.
Um, which is played for a bit of a joke, and then he goes, "I didn't actually burn them. I
Quite an
just burned their
awkward joke, but
photos."
still quite funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, just a tension breaker,
Yeah.
basically. And he does that, and Emily still says no.
And what I love is that he respects her wishes too.
He
I
does
think
this
that's
last
really
ditch effort,
important.
respects her wishes, and accepts her no,
Yeah.
and moves on the best he can with his life.
Yeah.
But it's been forever changed and shaped by Emily. Like, even if she said no and doesn't want to be with him anymore, he's started changing his one man show to be more about himself instead of just informational about Pakistan.
Yeah.
He accepts an offer from his friends, Bo Burnham and the other lady, to like
Yeah.
move cities with them
Yeah. Move
so
to
they
New
can do
York.
so they can do stand up more.
Yeah.
And something that really, really hit me about the fact that he gets asked to go is his immediate reaction is, "What about my roommate Chris?"
Yeah. Fuck that guy.
And it just shows how wrong his family's comment was. His family called him selfish, but
Yeah.
when given the opportunity to move to New York and further his career, his first thought is, "Are we taking my roommate with me?"
Yeah. What about the people who want to do the same thing want to do? Chris is also a comedian, just not a very good one. But
Yeah.
he still cares about everyone else before himself
hmm
in so many situations, and yeah, it's why the "you're selfish" comment from his parents seems to hit so much harder because it's just so untrue.
Wrong. They're
Yeah.
not listening.
They're just not listening to him. They don't see him for who he is, as opposed to as how he should fit into the cultural or traditional
Expectations.
Yeah, that's a perfect word for it.
We get all of this change. We get that he's putting feedback into his one man show from what Emily told him. You get that he's moving across country, but still had the the forethought to think about his housemate who he doesn't really like. I think I said roommate a couple times. Technically, he's a housemate that he doesn't really 100% like.
Yeah.
He does another thing which is incredibly vulnerable, and he crashes a family dinner at his parents'
yeah.
house. And despite the fact that they ignore him and literally no one talks to him in this moment,
No.
he still does it. He walks in, he goes, I know you're all not allowed to talk to me because I'm technically disowned. So I made some like postcards, and he's got like pass the salt, and he does one for his mother that says always with the jokes because or always with the comedy because that's what he always says to him. And then he does one, and it's a very tension breaking comedic
Yeah.
moment in a otherwise devastatingly upsetting vulnerable moment where he has one that says, I've always thought that Kumal was more attractive than Naveen. And
Yeah.
his brother goes, bullshit, and then immediately is like, oh my god, I'm not supposed to talk to you. And he goes, I will admit this one was designed to stir up a bit of controversy.
Yeah.
Like, it's
But
amusing.
I do love that his family may not respect his choices or understand his choices at the very least, but he still understands them and ultimately how to get through to them in a sense. And it's a powerful moment that illustrates that you know family and you will know your family.
You will always know your family, and what it also illustrates is that he's made the transition fully from bystander in his own life, like passive bystander, to taking action and working towards the goals that he wants. He's accepted that Emily doesn't want him, he's accepted that no, so now he's moving for his career and
Yes.
for his family.
Sense that's all he can do in this situation. But then it leads on to him doing his one-man show. And the one-man show goes really, really well because he finally starts talking about himself, and people enjoy, and his audience enjoy that.
Hearing about him and hearing about his family and all of the stuff that he hears. And we get a really heartfelt moment where he's sitting in the back and he's wearing sunglasses, but his brother's there to see his one-man show.
Yeah. And his brother will still support him.
Despite the fact that he's not allowed to talk to him, he still goes to see the show. And it harks back to before when his one-man show was bad, but his friends still went to go see it.
Yeah, but it leads to the point in the film that, again, is a good touch of realism in that Emily goes to see it as well. Or she goes to see the end of it, and she goes to speak to him, and I saw this as... This was probably a point where, after she'd seen the YouTube video of him breaking down and goes to talk to him about it, I think she had the intention of taking him back.
Yeah, it's
but
definitely
but their lives no longer aligned because he was moving to New York.
And you can tell how painful it is for him to tell her that. Like, you can see there's a pause. She kind of goes, oh, what are you up to? Like, da-da-da-da-da, this is what I've been up to. And he goes, I'm moving to New York. And there's that, oh, I'm so happy for you type of vibe. It's very awkward and tender.
Sad.
Yeah. It's like touching a tender wound. And like you
and
gotta open it to let it heal properly, but it still hurts to do it.
And at this point, with like about 10 minutes left in the film, you almost get this feeling that it's going to end with just their lives no longer merged or were parallel to each other again, and it just ended. But because it never seemed to line up after that, when Emily came out of her coma, she didn't want to see Kumal ever again. When she had come to terms with the change that he had gone through and was ready to give it a second try, he was leaving. And
he was moving on because he'd accepted her no. Like, he wasn't holding on to that.
And you're almost given this sense that it's this melancholy ending, and we see him move away, and it doesn't necessarily tie up the loose ends with his family, but you're given an insight that
they're starting to make amends.
Yeah, the father speaks to him and says you're still removed from the family, but they still show like evidence that they care. The mum had cooked him a meal for his trip.
It's almost like the ending of a Toy Story movie where the happy ending isn't exactly what you would expect it to be. Like, his family doesn't 100% take him back, but his mum cooked him something to take on his trip and allowed his dad to come and say goodbye. She still doesn't want to talk to him and won't even get out of the car or look at him.
Yeah.
But she cooked him his favorite meal and put extra potatoes in it because she knows that's how he likes it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really nice that you get, like, it wasn't needed, but you get that sort of, it's not closure, but that, like, movement towards normalcy with his family again. And then in the same vein, Beth and Terry had that argument, and just before they leave, in fact, while Emily is out to go see Kamal at the end of his one-man show, they show Beth moving from Emily's bed, where it's sort of implied that she's been sleeping in the same bed as her daughter while they've been staying there,
Yeah.
to the couch with Terry.
Yeah, where Terry has been sleeping. And I noted this down because symbolically, it actually represents more than just they're meeting each other eye to eye again, or she's forgiven him in any way. It symbolizes more than that, because she went out of her way to go and sleep in the probably less comfortable bed because she's meeting Terry's point of view.
Meeting halfway, willing to put the effort in to repair.
Well, not so much that. I was actually going to say making the extra effort to understand Terry or listen to Terry.
That's a really good way of putting it,
And
actually.
I believe this is the case because, ultimately they can see each other from the doorway. She could have, patted the bed and gone, "Hey, why don't you sleep in this bed?" And for a couch bed is not the most comfortable thing in the world, so ultimately, if she wanted to go with the more comfortable option, she could have just shouted him over.
Yeah.
But she instead gets up and goes to him. And I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, the direct action of, I am going to meet you halfway type of... Yeah. That's the vibe that I got from it, because evidently in the last argument that they had, she was the one that made it something that wasn't about Emily.
Yeah. Yeah.
She was the one that said, well, some things are your fault. She was the one that took it there.
Yeah.
And then she's the one to go to the bed. She's the one to meet him halfway. She's the one
to make the effort and go the distance to be there for him. And I like that. I really like that.
Yeah. And the reason that I brought it up is because we're not necessarily getting the ending that we wanted in these, last 30 minutes, but we're getting some nice tie-ups to other loose threads. Not everything's being tied into a nice bow, but they're gathering all the loose threads and sort of giving you answers to what might happen after he moves.
I was gonna say, even the Terry and Beth storyline, we didn't even need an ending to that, but it's nice that we get one.
Yeah, they don't leave you guessing about anything.
Yeah.
They know that this has been a very emotionally taxing movie, and they show you that they sort of harking back to the fact that, when Beth was talking about the stuff that happened with her family, that everything will be all right. It might not be the same, but it will be all right. And I really like that through line of that theme of everything will be okay. And then we're pretty much at the end of the movie now. Yeah. He's in New York. He's doing stand-up, and from the crowd, he gets a woohoo. And it's Emily who's come to New York to see him, and we get that sort of hark back to when she first heckled him by raising her hand, where he sort of talks to her in the same discussion that they had when he approached her at the bar to flirt, where he says, it's not good to heckle comedians. And she says...
But it was a compliment,
but it was a woohoo. Yeah. And it's he goes, heckling doesn't need to be negative to be heckling. And she goes, so if I shouted, "You're amazing in bed," and he goes, well, now you're getting more laughs than me. And they sort of have this back and forth before he asks her why she's come here. And she says, is it are you seeing someone? And she goes, oh, I came to look for someone. And he goes, oh, have you found him? Or her? I don't know who you're looking for. And she goes, yeah, I found him. And then we get credits. And it's this really nice... They found each other again. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the ending because it's just so sweet just to know that it ends well. Everything you've been through, it ends well, and that's just wonderful.
And even in the credits, the movie still gathers a couple loose threads where it shows you a picture of the real Emily that Kamal is married to. Who
I also read helped write the story, which makes sense. She was involved in it. Yeah.
But from there, you get to see pictures of their Pakistani wedding.
Yeah.
Which then shows you even more, tying up those loose threads, that he does talk to his family again.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that they're, as Beth said, it'll all be alright in the end.
And while this is a very emotionally taxing upsetting film. The main themes are you need to stand up for yourself and you need
Yeah.
to like be honest with yourself
Yeah.
and everything will be okay in the end. It's really, really wholesome and it gives like a nice rounded off feel to the story. You know, there's a lot of harkbacks to conversations that they had at the start. Like
Yeah.
there's the fact that his friends go to his stand up even though they think it's bad. And then there's the fact that his brother goes to his one man show even though he's not supposed to talk to him.
Yeah.
There's the wine tasting where Emily admits that she's overwhelmed by Kamal. And then there's when Kamal is sitting with her parents and he says fruit forward because he
Yeah.
got that from her.
He
And then
reiterates one of her lines.
at
Yeah.
the very end of the film, we get the same conversation they had in the bar, which sparked it all,
Yeah.
as the fact that they saw each other again. You know, it's a
Mm.
very well-rounded film.
That's probably a very good way to put it. Yeah. It's just a beautifully well-rounded film that is worth watching. But with that, we have reached the end of our talk about it. Monique, how did you find the film?
I found it really well. I think I said it a couple times while we were talking, but I've watched this film 3 times in under a year, and
Yeah.
I really love it. Every single time I watch it, I could watch it again. I probably might
That's
watch
fair.
it again because I kind of want my boyfriend to watch it, and I feel like he won't watch it without me. But
That
it's
is
one of
also
those ones
fair.
that
Yeah.
I would recommend to someone, and I would definitely save as like a come back to. I watched it, I suggested that we watch it for the podcast, and then I watched it again to take notes. And every single time I was right there immersed in the story.
Yeah.
Very, very closely tied to real life, and it's incredibly relatable. I really, really like it. And as someone who has the medical background of being sick and not knowing what's wrong with you and having to go through all of that information to find it out, like it really really is accurate to life and it has this sort of relatability to it and fulfillment to it because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about you? What did you think of the film?
I'm gonna say, well, I've watched it fewer times than you, but I do genuinely feel that sense that it's not the kind of film that you get used to very easily. You come back and rewatch it, and you'll enjoy it all the same for many rewatches to come. And it's though harrowing and difficult and awkward in points, not by intention, it's still a film that is very powerful and enjoyable to watch. And I really loved it. I think that it's the perfect kind of film to watch when you feel like you've got nothing to watch, because it fills time well, and it's still something that you're going to enjoy if you've watched 8, 9, 100 times, I think.
It's definitely like a very odd form of comfort movie, but a comfort movie nonetheless.
Absolutely. But what are you going to give it on a rating scale out of 10?
On a rating scale, I would probably give it 8.5 slices of cheese.
Yeah.
Like I said, heartwarming, very, very real, and it just strikes a chord with me because of all of the medical stuff, so.
Yeah. I actually gave it a higher rating score. I gave it a 9 out of 10 slices of cheese.
Oh, that's
not-
our highest rating yet.
Yeah, it's not a masterpiece. Sure, the cinematography is nothing to write home about. The music is fine. It's the story that makes it good. And I think that's... a film needs a good story to be great. And I think this film has a great story. So, it is great. Nothing more, nothing less.
I think the good thing about this one, like in comparison to the last movie we watched,
Yeah.
or in other movies, there's very little to criticize.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a lot of times that we point at something as frustrating. A lot of everything that happens, and this might be just because it is based on a real life story and is the retelling of something that happened, but there's nothing that is glaringly annoying or unresolved.
Yeah.
Wouldn't otherwise need to be resolved, or wouldn't be annoying if there was just better writing. You know, there's nothing like that to criticize.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's what makes this film so great. But as we close out the podcast. Hopefully, some of you managed to guess based on the hint from last week. This week, we've got another hint.
Just before you give that hint,
okay, yeah.
I just wanted to say that last week's hint was obviously another film where the protagonist goes through great lengths to help a loved one in a coma.
Yeah. I think that pretty much speaks for itself.
Yeah, and now that you've heard us talk about the movie, I hope that was an accurate link. What's our link for this week, Will?
So this week's link is next week we're going to be watching another film where a woman is reliant on technology to live.
Put your guesses down below. I'm super interested to see if people guess this one. We've been a bit sporadic, like none of these are the same themes, I suppose you could say. So
you can assume if you want to really guess this, then you're probably going to have to go on some kind of sporadic guessing at points.
It's not going to be another genre similar, I suppose.
Yeah, it's linked, but you could probably say it's tenuously linked.
I feel like all of these will be tenuously linked.
Yeah, but we've got to give them a challenge, so...
Yeah, come on guys, you're smart, you can figure it out.
But with that, we will close out. So thank you all for listening. See you next week.
See ya!